It's really one of my favorite things to be with you all doing this. And Chodesh Tov, happy, good month to all of us. Blessings. Today is the first day of the month. It's the day we celebrate the new month, with Torah reading and so on for those of us, who are in that kind of practice. And I'm here in Israel, and friends and family are reaching out to me constantly to ask me how I am and what's going on and stuff. I do want to just say for a minute, a little bit about my own experience here. I know a lot of you around the world, probably maybe some of you have contact with other folks, some of you don't here. I'm just outside Jerusalem, and on Monday night, actually I was at exactly this time on Monday night, because I was sitting down on Zoom in the same chair and the same computer for a meeting that began at 6 p.m., which is exactly the time it is now in Israel. And I heard this weird thing out my window, and I was like, oh, I think that's like a siren. And it hasn't happened to me before since I lived here. So I had to excuse myself from the meeting and get my family, and we decided we have a little reinforced room, and we were in there for a couple of hours, and then it seemed to go quiet, and then there was this nervous period of just should we wait, should we stay, who knows, nobody knows. In different places they're saying different things. Eventually we decided to put our kids to bed in their regular beds and just wait and see what happened. And since then, actually since Monday night in the Jerusalem area, nothing has happened. It's been quiet, which is great obviously on a very direct level, and also it's kind of weird and surreal because we're watching as the rest of the country is targeted. The South and Tel Aviv have been targeted by over 1,000 rockets at this point. So kind of strange experience, and we're just grateful. It just makes you grateful for literally to be alive and to be you just able to take a breath and go day at a time. And in this area of the country, everything's been running completely normally. Israelis really insist on functioning normally unless they absolutely are forced not to. So school is open, kindergarten is open, work is open, the roads are busy, and people just get on with it. So that's actually kind of soothing for me. I kind of find that helpful rather than kind of sitting around waiting for things to happen. It's kind of a nice proactive approach. So that's just something I want to share with you guys to let you know a little bit what's going on here. I know a lot of you will be praying and sending us blessings for peace, and we really appreciate that. Right, shall we learn Torah about Sivan? Let's do it. I'll share my screen. Let's do it. So Sivan, loving integration, and I have this whole sheet's a bit too long to do all of it in depth. I tried really hard just to cut it down, but it's kind of all necessary for piecing together all the pieces. So I'm just going to do the first section fairly swiftly as a kind of intro without reading everything inside and analyzing it all. It really is just setting us up in the world of Kabbalah, in the world of mysticism. And then we're going to do the rest of it. You'll see it's most of it a little bit more slowly and chew on it a bit more. The first bit.
Sorry to interrupt, but we don't see anything on your screen. So maybe try to reshare.
Oh,
at least I wasn't.
Great. Let me do that again. Is that better?
Yes.
Thank you so much. Good. It's good that you told me then, not halfway through the class. So the first section, just setting the scene in the world of mysticism about a month, and then, as I say, we'll slow down a little bit and chew on it once we're over that. So Sefer Yetzirah, our oldest work of mysticism, really, actually it's written on the sheet here, Kabbalah, but really it's before Kabbalah, really. Kabbalah is, scholars think Kabbalah doesn't really begin till at least the 1200s. So this is really before that. And it says, what are the properties of every month? And every month has a letter of the alphabet, and every month has something that people do that we can focus on and pay attention to in that month. Every month has a constellation and so on. So our month is a month of the letter Zayin, the seventh letter of the alphabet, Zayin, and motion or movement or walking, actually. The Hebrew word I'm going to highlight here is hiluch. So like halicha means to walk, and holech, I walk. So that's like the activity of the motion of the month, which is interesting. I want to say one word about that. So the Jewish word for law, for Jewish legal practice is halacha, which means this walking, this process. So I see that as like a hint that when we talk about receiving the Torah this month on our main festival of the month, Shavuot, coming up soon in a few days, receiving the Torah, we might think receiving is like a passive thing, but actually it's in this month of motion, it's in this month of walking. And as I said, our legal system is called halacha. So there's like this suggestion about how actually even receiving is actually something quite active. And we expect it to be constantly in motion and in movement, even in this month of receiving. I want to point out a couple other things about this. Really want to stress the twins, Gemini, just like in Western astrology, and also the letter of the month again, Zion, because we're going to see a teaching about that now from Rav Sadok Cohen, the great Chasidic master, passed away in 1900, just on the cusp of modernity. And this is what he says about the letter of the month, the Zion. He says, the Zion of Sivan includes the 7 lower attributes, which is the unification of the Holy Blessed One and the Shekhinah. What's he talking about? So first of all, on one level, we are we're towards the end of now a 7-week period where we count from Passover to Shavuot. It's called the Omer. So we count the days and count the weeks, and 7 is the magic number, 7 days in a week and 7 weeks. So everything in the 7s. And we also, each week has a Kabbalistic property or quality called a Sephirah on the Tree of Life. And he's saying that those attributes, qualities, those Sephirot, the 7 lower ones are unified into the divine union, meaning like when our character traits, when our personality traits are in harmonious balance, then so are God's. They're like when we do the work on ourselves of working on all these different character traits, then the Kabbalistic way of saying that everything is good is to say that the Holy Blessed One and the Shekhinah, which are different parts of God, are united. The Holy Blessed One is normally seen as masculine, and the Shekhinah is feminine. So it's like we fix the cosmos, we do tikkun olam, we fix the world by working on ourselves, and then we bring together different parts of God. That's what he's saying there, and he's saying 7 is the magic number, because 7 is how many weeks and how many qualities we are now on. We're like at the end of this 7-week, 7-quality process. So 7 is the ultimate level. Now the 7th of those qualities is called Malchut, or kingship, or sovereignty, and it's also called in Kabbalah Shekhinah, the divine presence. So what Malchut actually means on a certain level, Malchut actually means manifestation, like life manifesting, and that's one way of understanding what it means, the divine presence in this world, the Shekhinah. So I know that was a lot of Kabbalese, so I'm gonna as we go, I'm going to like restate it and try and restate it in plain English as we go. So if that was the first time you've heard any of that stuff and you didn't fully get it, don't worry, I'll present it over and over again in different languages. Hopefully it will become more clear. So we're on the 7th week, dealing with the 7th quality, which is Malchut, Shekhinah, manifestation of life. And at that level of completion, at that point of completion, the divine masculine and feminine are coming together. And that is one way of understanding actually what happens at Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai, which we're celebrating in our festival this month of Shavuot, is often presented in the sources as a marriage between us and the divine. And in Kabbalah, we down here are the divine presence. We are the Shekhinah. There are sources which say, another name for Shekhinah is the people of Israel, Knesset Israel, the community of Israel. So when we fulfill our potential, we manifest the divine down here, and then we can unify with the transcendent divine, and then again bring cosmic unity to Tikkun Olam. We can fix the universe. Now here, these other sources coming here, like next one from the Rav Moshe Cordovero, in Pardes Rimonim, it's about the same thing. He says, the abundant flow and upper light from Tiferet to Malchut, which is the souls of the righteous ones, complete Shekhinah. In other words, we people who are righteous, people who fulfill our potential, we when we get the quality of tiferet, right? Now, tiferet means beauty or harmony. So when we get this quality of beauty or harmony, right, then that is what leads to Shekhinah being completed, the divine presence being held down here. And then, as I said, then that's like one of the necessary stages to fixing the world and the universe. So that's just another kind of restatement of this idea. But I particularly wanted to highlight this one because Tiferet, it turns out, is the quality of our festival this month, Shavuot. So we're going to see a bit more like what is Tiferet, what is beauty, what is harmony. It's also compassion. Tiferet is sometimes called Rachamim or compassion. So we're going to see how that plays out in Shavuot, in the story of Ruth, and what our work this month is in the light of that. Another teaching from a great Chasidic master from the Bnei Yisachar on Sivan over the page. He says, on the very day of Shavuot, the Israelites were made into a sacred people in unity with their Creator, like twins, as it were. Now, we saw the constellation for the month is the twins of Gemini, Tomim. And he's saying, it's actually kind of a lovely idea, that we are a twin with the Creator. That us and God are twins, and then he says this is what happened in Mount Sinai. We were united like one person, and so we were like one twin, and then we united with the divine. And he points out that the gematria, the numerical value of the word twins, is the same as Malchut. If you're into gematria, I think it's a cool one. And then last source, and then actually we'll come back together and I'll just see if anyone has any clarifying questions on this section. So I know we've covered a lot of ground. This last one from Pardes Rimonim, from Moshe Cordovero, is just where he says every festival corresponds to one of these qualities on the tree of life. And our one, as I said before, Shavuot, that we're going to talk about, is the festival of Tiferet, of this beauty and harmony and compassion. So that's everything there was kind of setting the stage for what we're now going to do in the next section, which is like a more in-depth look at Shavuot and the texts and practices associated with Shavuot. Before we do that, I'm just going to come back together and just see if anyone has any clarifying questions or anything about all of that Kabbalah that you just want to clear up. Anything wasn't clear? Why is Sivan connected with the tribe of Zebulun? That is so interesting, Avril. So yeah, there are different ways that the tribes are associated with different months. There are different midrashim that put it differently. I would imagine that this might be something to do with Zebulun and Yisachar have this lovely symbiotic relationship where Yisachar toil in Torah, they learn Torah and teach Torah, and Zebulun support them financially. So maybe that's part of what's going on there with that connection with Zebulun. It's like the material support for Torah. Any other questions on any of the Kabbalah, the Tiferet, the Shekhinah, the Malchut? I know it's a lot of dense concepts if it's anybody's first time dealing with any of that. Well, I don't see any confused faces or questions, so I guess we're all master Kabbalists, so we can go on. Lovely. Do feel free to ask anything you want in the chat at any point. I'll be very happy to clear up anything that isn't clear. So let's go on, section 2. And as I say here, we can slow down a little bit and we're going to see some text together. Excuse me, I have a frog in my throat. So before we look at the actual text of Shavuot, the Megillah, the scroll, the story of Ruth, we're actually going to see 2 backstories which set the scene for it, which are very relevant. Right? One way of putting it is, whoever wrote the Book of Ruth, they were definitely writing it with these 2 backstories in mind. Like absolutely definitely, because there are, as we're going to see, there are quotes and paraphrases and situations which very clearly play off what we're going to see now here. So the first one is Genesis 19, because it's in the Torah, in the Parsha of Vayera. Some of you may have seen this story before, about the angels coming to Sodom. So the angels come to Sodom at evening, and Lot, remember he's the nephew of Abraham, Lot sat in the gate of Sodom, and Lot saw them. He sees the angels. Of course, he doesn't know they're angels. He sees them as people. And he rose up to meet them, and he fell down on his face to the earth, saying, "Look, my lords, please turn aside into your servant's house and stay all night, and wash your feet, and you will rise up early and go on your way. And please come to my house and stay the night. And then in the morning, you better get out of here quick. And they said, no, we will stay in the street. And he pressed them greatly, and they turned to him and entered his house, and he made them a feast, and he baked matzot, and they ate. So almost the whole story is going to be referenced in text we're going to see later, but the phrases which are bolded are basically like quoted. Like you'll see them appear almost exactly the same again. So that's just there for you to to help you see the repetition when we see the other text later. Carrying on over the page. But before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sidon, from young to old, all the people from every part of the city surrounded the house. And they called to Lot, saying to him, where are the men that came into you tonight? Bring them out to us, and we will know them. Right, obviously, sexually know them in the biblical sense. And Lot went out to them to the door and shut the door after him. And he said, please, my brothers, do not commit such evil. Look, I have 2 daughters that have not known man. Please let me bring them out to you, and you do with them as is good in your eyes. But to these men do nothing, since they've come under the shadow of my roof. And they said, stand back. And they said, this one came here as an alien, and now he's playing the judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them. So, very obviously an incredibly problematic, very troubling text. Unbelievably, Lot starts off with Lot seeming to be a good guy, right? Like he's like offering hospitality and trying to help these people who he doesn't know are angels, and he's trying to save them. And then he says, take my daughters and do as you want with them instead, which is obviously very, very troubling. And do whatever you want with them, but don't touch these strangers, these men who I'm trying to protect. And then the townspeople say, stand back. And then they say, Lot is a stranger among us. Like he wasn't from Sodom. He went there relatively recently. And now he's playing the judge over us. Now he thinks he's better than us. Now we're going to do even worse to you than with them. So as you may or may not know, the story continues with the angels kind of revealing their powers. They blind all the townspeople so that they can't find the door and harm them. And then the angels help Lot and his family to escape because God rains down fire and brimstone on Sodom and Gomorrah to destroy them for being places of such wickedness. Now, one of the associations of Sodom we find in our sages in the Mishnah here in Ethics of the Fathers in the next source, which is one of many, many texts we have which kind of attempts to explain why God had to destroy these places. It says, someone who says, what is mine, and what is yours, this is an average temperament. And there are some who say, this is the temperament of Sodom. I should really like this text because I like the different opinions and perspectives there. There's one opinion that says, actually, that's a very reasonable thing. What's mine is mine, and what's yours is yours. I believe in private property. What's the big deal? Like, why is that so bad? That is, it's not excessively generous, but it's Benoni, as it says there. It's intermediate, it's average. It's kind of what we expect from most people. And there's another opinion that says no. That is actually the quality of Sodom, meaning like, if everybody in society has that attitude of what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours, and that's it, then the society actually won't last. It will actually, it might not get fire and brimstone raining down on it from heaven, but it's not actually going to endure. It's impossible to endure because by implication, to survive, life requires more generosity than that. Life requires more compassion than that. And if we're going to talk about it in Kabbalah, to go back to the Sephirot of the Tree of Life, saying what's mine is mine and what's yours is a perfect expression of Gevurah. Gevurah means severity, boundaries, strength. Really, it's about those clear-cut boundaries of this is mine, this is yours. Gevurah also relates to judgment also. This is wrong, this is right. This is how it is, that's it. But judgment on its own. Whereas chesed is loving kindness. And when you get a healthy synthesis of loving kindness and boundaries or severity, what you get is Tiferet. Remember, that's the quality of Shavuot that we're really focused on in this class. Tiferet, again, means compassion, harmony, beauty. So when someone says what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours, they're according to the second opinion here, they're lacking that compassion and that kindness and that generosity, which the opinion here seems to be saying is necessary for life to survive, is necessary for life to go on. So that's one backstory. Now we have another one that, believe it or not, is actually even more troubling. After this one, maybe I'll come back together with all of you, and we'll I'll hear your questions and comments before we dive into Ruth. So the Book of Judges, very near the end of the Book of Judges, there's this story. I've given like a little brief summary of it here on the sheet, which I'll use here to kind of bring us up to speed, because it's too long a story to read the whole thing. So what we got here is a story about a Levite, somebody from the tribe of Levi, but he's from the land of Ephraim, and his concubine deserted him. Back then, concubines were, a common thing. It wasn't like controversial to have a concubine, and she left him to go back to her father's house in Bethlehem. So obviously, the fact he wanted to leave and go back home is not a great sign. He went to woo her. So this Levite from the land of Ephraim goes to Bethlehem, and he leaves with her. So he picks her up and says, you're coming with me. We're going home. Okay. On his subsequent travels with his concubine and his servant, he refuses to stay in a non-Jewish city, but insists on continuing until he reaches the Benjamite city of Gibeah. So it's actually very heavily ironic in the text. What happens is they're traveling and they notice it's getting dark. It's like, the sun's going down and they've got to find somewhere to stay. And his servant says, well, we should stay over there because that's the nearest town. And the Levite says, I'm not going to stay just anywhere. I'm going to wait until I can find a nice Jewish city with people who, because they're Jewish, I can trust to be hospitable. So that's like a bitter irony in what happens next. As it says, nobody from Gibeah takes them into their house until an old man, also from Ephraim, appears and invites them in. So parallel to the story we already saw in Sodom, you have guests showing up in a place and nobody's taking them in. And then one person shows up and says, you better come with me. And this is what happens. While they were enjoying themselves, so they've gone into this man's house, they're having a meal, the men of the town, a worthless lot, had gathered about the house and were pounding on the door. Now remember, we are in the Benjamite city, a city of the tribe of Benjamin, meaning Jews, not Sodom, right? Not a place, Sodomites are not Jews. This is the nice Jewish place where they wanted to wait till they got to, because they thought it would be safer there. So the Benjamites are gathered around the door, they're pounding on the door. They called to the aged owner of the house, bring out the man who has come into your house so that we can know him. Just like in Sodom. The owner of the house went out and said to them, please, my brothers, do not commit such evil. Since this man has entered my house, do not perpetrate this outrage. Look, here is my virgin daughter and his concubine. Let me bring them to you. Afflict them, do with them whatever is good in your eyes, but don't do this outrageous thing to this man. So again, incredibly problematic, disturbing text, right? Again, the lack of hospitality, again, the desire to violate the male guests. And again, the owner says, oh no, don't take the man, instead take these women, my daughter and his concubine, and do what you want with them. Now, what happens next is incredibly disturbing. I've put a summary of it here, and it's relevant for us to know. We need to know it. But what happens is the concubine, we don't actually hear, I think, what happens to the daughter. But what happens to the concubine is the men of the town have their way with her, and she's killed. She dies in this like horrible, the most horrible way. This gang rape. And she's given no voice. We never hear like her say anything. The Levite gets up in the morning and he says to her, come on, let's go. And he realizes, because she doesn't respond, that she's dead. So he carries her home, her body. He cuts her body into 12 pieces and sends one to each tribe with a note saying what happened, like this is what the Benjaminites did. And then all of the tribes gather together against the Benjaminites to have a massive civil war in which tens of thousands of Israelites die. This is a big deal. Now, in a way, I'm pleased it was a big deal because, if that behavior would have gone unchallenged, in some way it would be even worse. But this led to the deaths of tens of thousands of people. That's the end of that story. Now, we're going to start thinking about how these stories set us up for the Book of Ruth. And actually, we'll just read this next little bit here, and the end of the Book of Judges, which we'll see is like a transition to Ruth. And then I want to just come back together and just see if anyone has any questions or comments about what we saw already. So this quote from the end of the Book of Judges, actually it's repeated a few times in different forms towards the end of the book. It says, in those days, there was no king in Israel. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. Isha yashar beinav yaseh. Everyone just does what they think is right. In other words, a kind of like moral relativism and anarchy, right? And this is seen as, it's really a vacuum of morality. This is seen as the basis from which the people then turn to Samuel, the prophet, and they say, you've got to appoint us a king. Like, we can't deal with all this anarchy anymore. So you have the whole period really of the Judges, the whole book of Judges and the whole period of it is really intermittent order. Like, oh, then there was peace for one generation, 40 years, okay. But then most of the time is pretty chaotic, broken up by these shorter periods of order. So Samuel, who is the prophet who oversees the transition from the book of Judges and the period of Judges to Kings, he anoints the first two kings. He's really the human bridge from that anarchy to the order. So tradition says, funnily enough, that he also wrote the Book of Ruth. And that's what we're going to go into next. As I promised, let's come back together first, just hear if anyone has anything to say or ask about any of those very disturbing stories. Jay Burkle, you said, what time period is that? I'm sorry, I don't know what you are asking about exactly. Was it the Book of Judges you're asking about?
I think so. That's about when it came in.
Right, it's also great. The Book of Judges would put us at, it's basically quite shortly after the Israelites enter the land. There's the period of Joshua, one generation of leadership under Joshua who takes over from Moses. He takes the people in the land. Then after Joshua, it's Judges. So Joshua really begins that era. It's the beginning of our relationship with the Promised Land. And then it's like the transition. Like after that, we go into the period of Kings. Jody says, were there any prohibitions against cutting up corpses? Definitely. Yeah, great question. That's definitely completely forbidden. And in this case, it's seen as, there was an overriding moral need. And, as I said, this war caused the deaths of so many people. And that's also like a sign of how kind of serious this was. Why did Lot serve matzah, says Steve? Well, the tradition says it was because it was Pesach. And there was, of course, we think of Pesach as coming later when the Jews left Egypt, but the mystics, at least, and even really the early rabbis of the Midrash, see the festivals as tied into the annual cycle and to the energy of the seasons, even without these historical events. So even though the liberation, the exodus from Egypt hasn't happened yet, it was still Pesach at that time of the year, according to how the tradition understands that. There may be another reason, of course. That just may have just been what they eat in that place and so on. But I don't know. But that's what the tradition says anyway. Any other thoughts on those two very disturbing stories? Not cheery, I know. Don't worry, we're going to see some good news in a moment. Fine, let's do it. So just bear in mind, Shavuot is the festival, as I said, of Tiferet, which includes, Tiferet can be understood as rachamim or compassion, as well as beauty and harmony. And so on some level, what we're going to see now is the fixing, the sequel in some ways to those stories in a way that kind of redeems them and kind of shows that people can learn a lesson from them. So that's what we're going to see now in the Book of Ruth. share my screen with you again. So, as I said before, the tradition says that Samuel, who is this human bridge from anarchy to the period of the kings, he's the one who actually wrote the Book of Ruth. So he, according to the tradition, he really sees and embodies this process. So he's trying to tell us something about what it means to create Malchut. Remember, we talked about how when everybody down here is doing our job and things are harmonious, then we have a healthy Malchut. We have a health, which is also, remember, the Kabbalah is also called Malchut, the divine presence, Shekhinah. So when that's what he's going to show us now, how when we get it right, it leads to all these qualities being expressed healthily, which is tikkun olam, it's fixing the world. So it's going to start with the first verse from the Book of Ruth. We won't read all of it, just like some highlights which show us these issues coming up. So Ruth 1:1, and it came to pass in the days when the judges judged that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the field of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. So first of all, the repetition of this verb, judging, when the judges judged. There's a lot of midrashic material, commentaries talking about why it's repeated, but it does remind us, it echoes the story of Sodom when the townspeople say Lot is playing the judge. That was my translation of that. It's also a double use of the verb, it's also a repetition of the verb, and it's not a very common verb to repeat in that way. So that's one of the many, many, many allusions and connections between all these different texts. And as we go on, you'll see more of them. Also, the fact we're talking about Bethlehem again, which is a place that was mentioned in the story we just saw from the Book of Judges. So let's carry on with a commentary on the Book of Ruth, which will give us a nice thought for why the tradition says we read this book, this scroll, on Shavuot. Why is this the key teaching of Shavuot, the festival of Tiferet? Rabbi Zera taught, this scroll of Ruth teaches us nothing about ritual purity and impurity, or about what is forbidden and what is permitted. So why was it written? To teach how good is the reward of those who do acts of loving oneness, or chesed, gemilah chasedim, loving kindness. Now, Rabbi Zera is saying, there's no religious value in the Book of Ruth in terms of like what's kosher, what's not kosher, what's allowed, what's not, but it does teach us about chesed, generosity or kindness. And remember, that is the essential ingredient. If we go back to thinking about the tree of life and the Sefirot, remember I said the quality of severity, gevurah, needs to be balanced by chesed. When you put them both together, then you get Tiferet. So it's kind of a given that we have boundaries, we have laws, we have a sense of this is mine and this is yours, but we need that generosity. And that's what we're going to see brought into a healthy balance with it to get that Tiferet. Let's keep going in the Book of Ruth. So to give a very, very brief backstory to help us understand what's going on here, to anyone who's not familiar with the text, Elimelech and his Israelite family, because there's a famine in Bethlehem, they leave there. Now, they seem to be very wealthy, so the Midrash says they leave because they actually don't want to give, they don't want to share. They're wealthy and they don't want to support everybody else, which is obviously a lack of chesed. So they go and live with the Moabites, which is already in the tradition considered not a good thing to do, to leave your own people and your own land and go and live among Moabites is not smiled upon. And while they're there, they seem to be cursed by God because first of all, Elimelech dies, then one son dies, then another son dies, and then so Elimelech's widow, Naomi, is now left in this very, very terrible situation. Not only did her husband die and her sons die, she now also has 2 daughter-in-laws who she is technically responsible for. So one of them, Orpah, just turns her back and says, bye, don't worry about it, I'm off. And Ruth actually becomes the heroine of our story and an archetype of Tiferet, and the whole linchpin, as we'll see, not only for Shavuot, but for bigger values in Judaism. So Ruth turns to Naomi and says these beautiful words, which have rightly become very famous. And Ruth said, don't ask me to leave you and to return from following after you. For where you go, I will go. And where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. And the Eternal will do so to me, and more so, if anything but death separates you and me. Now, this actually becomes the blueprint for conversion to Judaism. This is what, unfortunately these days there's a lot of other complications with that process sometimes in certain places. But this according to the tradition, according to the Talmud and the ancient tradition, this is what the essence of what it means to convert to Judaism is supposed to be. It's supposed to be somebody says, I am with you. I am with you. I am part of this, whatever happens. And this is why part of conversion process is we say to the convert, do you know that the Jewish people have a very hard situation here? We're often persecuted, misunderstood, exiled, and so on. And if the convert says, yes, I know that, and it's still a privilege to be part of this, then that is considered a big part of their conversion, complete right there and then. That's a big part of it. In terms of Tiferet, Ruth, Tiferet is mapped when the Sefirot, when these qualities are mapped onto the human body, Tiferet is mapped onto the heart. Tiferet is a quality of the heart, and again, compassion, Rachamim is one way it's interpreted too. So it seems to me to be a lot of beauty and harmony and balance and compassion in Ruth's approach. She's saying, I'm with you, not because it's like the logical thing to do. It's not so much, a rational choice. I've like calculated my options. It's like, I'm with you with my heart. I want to share your destiny. I want to share your experiences. And I'm committed to that. I'm all in. My heart is in it, as we say. So that's one of the first passages where we see the quality of person that Ruth is and how she embodies this quality. And now we're going to see another one in her relationship with Boaz. Boaz is a wealthy landowner who just so happens to be in the extended family of Naomi and Ruth. He's in Bethlehem. What happens is when Ruth says, Ruth says to Naomi, I'll go where you go. So Naomi says, well, we're going to Bethlehem because that's where I'm from, and that's the only place I know where I can go. So they go back to Bethlehem, the house of bread. But I remember there used to be a famine, and now things are getting back to better shape over there. And Boaz, this wealthy landowner who's in their extended family, notices Ruth. He notices that Ruth is among the poor people who pick up the gleanings, the leftover bits of crop in the field. And Boaz notices Ruth, and he says to her, oh, you can come here anytime you want, and I'll make sure that nobody hassles you, and you can drink water from the place where they have water. Like he basically gives her a VIP pass for gleaning. Like just make sure she has it really cushy. Instead of like having to struggle for little bits, he makes sure that they leave her plenty so that she does very well, so she has enough to feed herself and Naomi. And Ruth is so grateful. This is what happens. She fell on her face and bowed to the ground, and she said to him, why have I found favor in your sight, that you should recognize me, seeing as I am a foreigner? So Ruth is a Moabite. She's not even one of the people. She's now in a Jewish place, surrounded by Jews, and she feels like an awkward outsider. And she's saying to Boaz, "Why are you being so nice to me? I'm a stranger here." And Boaz answered her and said, "It's been entirely told to me all that you have done for your mother-in-law, Naomi, since the death of your husband, and how you left your father and your mother and your homeland, and you've come to a people that you didn't know before. May the Eternal repay your work, and may your reward be completed from the Eternal, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." So Ruth is very humble. She's done this amazing thing of loyally following her mother-in-law, but she's certainly not claiming any credit for it or thinking she's great because of it. But Boaz is recognizing this amazing quality in her. Boaz is saying, "I heard this amazing act of commitment and love, that you've decided not to abandon your mother-in-law and to go wherever she goes and be with her and help her. And indeed, Ruth is going to the field to collect gleanings to feed Naomi and herself, right? She's supporting her mother-in-law." And Boaz says, "May God pay you back for this. I hope you get good things for this." And then Ruth says to Boaz, "Let me find favor in your sight, my Lord, because you have comforted me, and because you have spoken to the heart of your maidservant, even though I am not so much as one of your maidservants. So Ruth, again, humble, even though I'm nothing, thank you for, everything you've done for me, and let me find favor in your eyes. Like, I hope she's saying, that you like me, and I hope, you'll continue to be nice to me. So this is how their relationship develops, and it develops in a romantic direction. And at the key point, Naomi tells Ruth to go to Boaz on the threshing floor and uncover his feet, which is an interesting thing to do. And when she does that, he promises to become her redeemer and husband, on the condition that there's one other person who is actually closer in the family and therefore has a stronger claim. That person first has to relinquish his claim. So as long as that person says, okay, I'm out of it, then Boaz says, I will redeem you. Now, what that goes back to is, in the Torah, it says, if a family fall into poverty, and which is the situation now with Naomi and Ruth, that they are penniless, they have no property, then somebody else from their extended family can come and redeem them, and essentially marry the appropriate person in the family to marry, and kind of bring that part of the family back into the rest of the family and support them financially. And, it's a arrangement, a relationship with many levels. In this case, also there's a genuine level of romance and connection and love as well. But there's obviously also the kind of financial and existential levels too. So when Ruth goes to Boaz on the threshing room floor, he says to her, stay the night, Lini halayla, which, by the way, is the language used back in the story of Sodom. And she spends the night at his feet. And as you might imagine, this story of this woman spending the night at the feet of this man raises some eyebrows among the rabbis, the commentators, who say, well, according to strict Jewish law, men and women are not supposed to be alone together until they are, it's appropriate for them to be married, they're married or something like that, right? So what does it mean? These people who are, these people are seen as righteous. We see them as being the heirs actually to King David. So what does it mean they spend the night together with her at his feet? So this source from the Talmud, Rabbi Yochanan said, Joseph's strong temptation was but a petty trial to Boaz, meaning Joseph, who was tempted by Potiphar's wife, that was nothing compared to Boaz, but the tradition understands Boaz completely passed the test, meaning nothing improper happened that night. Again, according to the tradition, I don't claim to know if what's real and what isn't, what's literal and what isn't, but the tradition says that Boaz and Naomi had this amazing, respectful, restrained night of connection that was completely, not consummated. And then they waited. And what happens is the next day, Boaz does what he says he's going to do. He finds the guy. It's kind of like magic how he finds him. So everything just kind of flows. He finds the guy who's closer in the family, who has a stronger claim to redeem the family of Naomi and Ruth. And he says, would you like to redeem the family? It means marrying Ruth. And as well as that, you get to take over the land, which used to belong to them, but then they lost. And this guy says, yeah, I'd love to do that. Oh, wait, did you say it means marrying Ruth, the Moabite? No, I'm not doing that. If I do that, I'll lose my good name. So I'm not going to do that. So Boaz says, great, well, no problem, because I'm happy to do it. And the irony is that the guy who doesn't want to lose his good name by marrying Ruth the Moabite, his name is Ploni Almoni, which is the Hebrew equivalent of John Doe, which means Mr. Anonymous. So he actually loses his good name by not wanting to lose his good name. Meanwhile, Boaz marries Ruth and raises up the family, the lost part of the family, and redeems it. And technically, it's what's called a Levirate marriage, which means he's marrying Ruth, technically in the name of the rest of the family that was lost, of Elimelech and his sons who died. So this is what's called in Hebrew Yibum. Again, that's Levirate marriage. But what it means is, okay, you live, you marry, you have kids, but in some way they actually belong to the people, the other part, the people from the family who have already died. In some way, it's actually in their name, like it's considered part of their line for the purposes of inheritance, for example. which is, a curious, interesting law. The Torah introduces it, and this is an example of it. So in some very deep way, what Ruth and Boaz do is actually very selfless. Like when they come together, there does seem to be a genuine chemistry between them. But they also seem to be doing it for things much larger than themselves. We'll look at two more quick bits from the Book of Ruth, and then we'll come back together again with all of you, and then I'll kind of tie it all back in with the Kabbalah we saw at the beginning and spiritual practice. So when Ruth and Boaz get married, this is what the townspeople say: "May the Eternal make the woman who is coming into your house, Ruth, like Rachel and Leah, both of whom built up the house of Israel. Prosper in Ephrata and perpetuate your name in Bethlehem." Now, what is amazing about that is the townspeople are from the line of Leah. Now, Jacob, Israel had two wives, and they were unfortunately bitter rivals. They were sisters who really competed a lot, Rachel and Leah. And the townspeople here are in Bethlehem. They are in the tribe of Judah, which is from Leah. So what's amazing here is they put Rachel, who is on some level actually their enemy, they put Rachel before Leah. So this is seen as a very strong hint that the altruism of Boaz and Ruth, and I've given you a few examples of that, but there are many more in the text. If you read the whole text, it's actually a very, very beautiful love story. And compared to most biblical texts, it's actually quite short. It's quite readable. And it's one of the more pleasant biblical texts to read. So I do recommend reading the whole thing. If you read the story, you'll see there's a lot of altruism throughout the story, even Boaz and Ruth, both with each other and generally. And they often display a kind of unselfish thought for those around them in a really beautiful way often. And, one example of this is, Ruth never says, I want this, I need this, this is for me, and so on. Just the whole story, it's just not in her vocabulary. So the people here seem to recognize there's something healing and fixing, a tikkun, a fixing, which is happening through this union. And indeed, this is how the book ends. Naomi took the child and laid it in her bosom and became nurse to it. So first of all, we talked about the levirate marriage, that, on some level, the baby and everything in the relationship doesn't belong to you. So here we see an example of that. Boaz and Ruth have a baby, but Naomi nurses it, which is, first of all, Naomi is a very old woman at this point. So I don't know if we're meant to understand she miraculously could nurse, or she just was playing that role for the baby on some level, right? But either way, again, we see that it's not about Ruth's kind of personal benefit. And the woman, her neighbors gave it a name, saying, there is a son born to Naomi. They called his name Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. So a few things here. I don't know about you, but I do not let my neighbors name my children, right? Again, there's like an unselfishness here. There's a collective element here. And indeed, we see this is the baby which leads to David. And David, King David, is the archetype of healthy malcha in our tradition. Of course, he's he's a human being who commits sins and mistakes, and the Bible relates very clearly his mistakes. But the Kabbalists see him, and even the early rabbis, even though he's flawed, as the ultimate human manifestation of the quality of malcha, of sovereignty, of kingship, and of maximizing our potential, therefore, as a people. Because remember, malcha is also the Jewish people. So indeed, to this day, we still say, every time the moon renews, we in the traditional liturgy for blessing the new moon, we still say, David Melech Israel Chai V'Kayam. We still say, the king, David, King of Israel, lives forever. And so this malchut, this quality of sovereignty that we hope will return to the world in the tradition through the Messiah. We talk about the Messiah being the son of David, Mashiach ben David. So it all kind of comes from here, from this story. So just bear in mind that all came from Ruth, right, who's from Moab. And something I didn't mention before, but actually I want to mention now, then we're going more into the Kabbalah, is that Moab actually comes from Sodom. Because after the story of Sodom being destroyed by fire and brimstone, Lot's two daughters get him, they wait till he's asleep, and then they sleep with him because they think that humanity is finished and they want to continue it. So Moab actually comes from one of those unions. So Ruth, who comes from Sodom, whose story echoes Sodom, And also that other story we saw from the Book of Judges, the concubine in Gibah, the Plegesh for Gibah, these stories where there's a lack of kindness and lack of altruism and lack of generosity, Ruth and Boaz fix that. And the result is eventually David, and eventually the tradition says the Messiah, which represents, a perfected world, a healed world, where all these qualities we've been talking about are fixed, are balanced and in alignment. I want to come back together with you. We'll see if there's any burning questions. And then for the last couple of minutes, I want to just see a little bit more of the Kabbalah and tie this all together. So I see a few things there. Elaine, the similarity between the words of the two stories seems as if there was a repeat and repair going on. Yeah, exactly, Elaine. That's a great way to put it. As Judith Klitzman puts it in her book, subversive sequels. Right, sequels. There are sequels of stories in the Bible which change it a little bit. This is one of those. Steve says, prior to Mount Sinai, were there any guidelines for who one could or couldn't sleep with? Good question. So before the Torah was given, we don't know what there was or what there wasn't. It's that the tradition projects backwards. Like the rabbis project backward. They look at people and they say, oh, they should have been keeping this, they should have been keeping that. And just thinking about the period that we're in, I didn't actually say this clearly before. Okay. One of the many connections between the story of Ruth and the Book of Judges is it's seen as happening around the same time. So this is actually after the revelation at Sinai. So they already have the laws about, sleeping, who can sleep with, and levirate marriages and so on. So that's another one of the connections there, that everything we're reading about in the Book of Ruth is happening at roughly the same time as that story from the Book of Judges where there was that anarchy and that cruelty. Is there anything in the tradition that indicates that Ruth may be a reincarnation of Lot? Well, as I just said, she's certainly a descendant of Lot, so that's very clear. And yeah, I haven't seen anything directly saying it was a reincarnation, no, but it's certainly possible. How many marriages in the Torah are based on love, falling in love, or are they arranged? There's a few which are based on love and falling in love. Like Jacob falls in love with Rachel. Well, at least he kisses her passionately and then wants to marry her. Isaac, it explicitly says loves Rebecca. That's the only time it says explicitly, and he loves her. So that's best I can answer that one. We just have a couple minutes left, so let's go back to the sheet. I just want to see a little bit more of the sources because some of them tie together all these different themes we've been building up until now. So about Malchut, which again is the divine presence in this world, Shekhinah, manifestation, life when it's at its most complete. And again, something that King David and the Messiah really embody and represent. Malchut, the Zohar says in this first source at the top of the next page, Malchut has nothing of its own. What does that mean? Actually, Rav Sadok in the next source explains it quite well. He says essentially, someone who recognizes that they have nothing of their own is made into a chariot, a vessel, a vehicle for the quality of Malchut. So we might often in life struggle with this. It's a constant back and forth. Nobody's expected to get it right all the time. But when we can give up a little bit of our ego identity, again, in the way that Ruth and Boaz really exemplify in a lot of ways in that story, then we make a little bit more space for Shekhinah, the divine presence, Malchut, to come through us. Right? That fixes us a little bit. And ultimately, when we're talking about Shavuot, we're talking about the work of Tiferet, the work of the heart, which leads to that. We're talking about having compassion, having the right mixture of generosity and boundaries, which then allows us to ultimately lead to creating a healthy Malchut, a healthy manifestation of life in this world. One more source, which ties it indirectly with Shavuot, and then again, we'll come back together. I'd love to hear anyone's questions or comments. It's from the Chernobyl Rebbe, a great Chasidic master. He says, our blessed rabbis taught in the Talmud, in the Reuben, that the Torah is given as a gift to someone who makes himself like a wilderness on which everyone tramples. And this is necessary to receive the Torah every Shavuot, to be like a wilderness and not to forget what one learns. And a person should request from the blessed God to make my soul like dust to everyone. So that's in the Amidah, the end of the Amidah prayer. We say, please make my soul like dust in that way. And the Rebbe here is saying, we need that to receive the Torah. which maybe is one of the reasons why we're learning about, we read the Book of Ruth, the scroll of Ruth on Shavuot. Like, we need to remember, if we want the divine presence to flow through us, we want to receive the Torah, we need to have these different qualities we've been talking about in alignment. We need to get the right balance again of generosity and boundaries, so we have healthy compassion, and then that can allow us to eventually create the right malchut, the right manifestation of life, sovereignty, and a world that is hopefully balanced and repaired. So that, I know, was a lot of text. So again, let's come back together and to see if anyone has any questions and to be cleared up. Elaine says, Sodom is not redeemable. The period of Judges was not a good time either, but individuals can redeem period of society. Yeah, very well put. That's how the tradition sees it. The Talmud says that one individual or a few individuals can save a place, can save the world. And in fact, we see that in the Torah, because God says, God agrees to Abraham. Abraham says, what if there's 50 righteous people there? And then Abraham negotiates and bargains with God until God agrees that even if there's only 10 righteous people there, that would save Sodom. God says, I won't destroy Sodom if there's 10 righteous people there. And unfortunately, there were not 10 righteous people there. So, the destruction went ahead. But yeah, that is how the tradition sees it. Anyone else want to clear anything up that isn't clear, or add anything, ask anything, share any insights that arose for you? Well, you're also welcome, and I wish you a very Tiferet Dik, very heart-centered Shavuot. And as I say, a pretty good way to guarantee that happens is to read the Book of Ruth. It's just a very, very heart-warming, heart-touching book. So I hope you get a chance to at least look at it. And I hope that this framing will help you appreciate, some of what the tradition says is going on there, and will make it more meaning for you. And please, God will all receive the Torah that we need to receive.